Has Cleopatra's tomb been found? The shocking discovery. Egyptian archaeologists have recently made an incredible discovery near Cairo. Drumroll, please. They've found the oldest and most complete mummy ever uncovered in Egypt. That's right. They were keeping it under wraps, pun intended. The 4,300-year-old mummy was discovered in a group of tombs near the Step Pyramid of Djoser, which dates back to ancient Egypt's Old Kingdom. The mummy was covered in layers of gold. The team also uncovered several other tombs, one belonging to an ancient Egyptian official and another to a secret guard who had the power to perform special ceremonies. One of the most interesting finds was the tomb of a scribe, which held the largest statues ever found in the area. This massive burial site also contains over a dozen pyramids and tombs. One of the world's most famous mummies belongs to Queen Hatshepsut, who ruled Egypt for about 20 years. She built all kinds of magnificent structures and opened up new trade routes. But when archaeologist Howard Carter found her tomb in the Valley of the Kings, her coffin was empty. However, in another tomb, Carter found two coffins, one belonging to Hatshepsut's nurse and the other to an unidentified woman. In 2006, a team of experts decided to investigate whether that mysterious woman could actually be Hatshepsut herself. They found a tooth in a wooden box labeled with her name, and when they compared it to a gap in the mummy's mouth, it was a perfect match. Now, Ramses II was an incredibly impressive ruler, but it's really his mummy that made history. You don't hear much about his father, though. Anyway, Ramses is considered one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs, ruling for 60 years and living into his 90s, which is pretty amazing for that time period. He's thought to have fathered over 100 children. Talk about a big family. After he died, he was originally buried in the Valley of the Kings, but grave robbers tried to steal the treasures from his tomb. Officials weren't happy about that, so they secretly moved his body to keep it safe. In the 19th century, Ramses II's mummy was discovered along with a group of other rulers and officials. But it wasn't in great shape. So archaeologists flew it to Paris for some high-end restoration. There was just one problem. You can't just fly a mummy to another country like that. The only solution was to give Ramses II his own passport. His occupation? King, of course. It even had a photo. Now, most mummies don't exactly have what you'd call moisturized skin, but one ancient woman, known as Lady Di, proved otherwise. No, not that Lady Di. This wealthy woman from ancient China was found in a beautifully decorated tomb in 1971, and she looked amazing, for a mummy, that is. Thanks to the unique conditions in her tomb, like the humidity and lack of oxygen, her body was almost perfectly preserved. Her skin was soft, her hair was styled, and her limbs were still flexible. The museum that now displays her body also proudly showcases a bunch of luxury items she was buried with, like evening dresses and musical instruments. Archaeologists did more research on her and found out that she died of a heart attack at around age 50. Even though she's been gone for over 2,000 years, Lady Di is still making history. Then there's Otzi the Iceman, whose mummy was discovered in the Alps in 1991. At first, Austrian authorities thought he was just a modern mountain climber because his body was so well preserved. But nope. Turns out he was from the Copper Age. He was found more than 10,000 feet above sea level. Studying his remains has taught us a lot about life in Copper Age Europe. For example, we now know he was from Central Europe, liked eating meat, and suffered from arthritis, clogged arteries, and gut issues. It also seems like he used acupuncture and herbal medicine to treat his health problems. And he was pretty handy with tools. He had sharpened them just a few days before his sudden death. Was he expecting trouble, or just getting ready for everyday chores? Who knows? Finally, we have King Tut, probably the most famous mummy of all. This young pharaoh died at just 19 years old, over 3,000 years ago, but his mummy is still one of the most well-known in the world. When his tomb was opened in 1922, people went wild. It was practically untouched. Unlike most royal tombs, it still had lavish coffins, some made of solid gold. Tutankhamun's tomb didn't just give us a glimpse into ancient Egypt, it also taught us a lot about the era he lived in, including details about his mother. DNA analysis helped identify his parents and revealed Turns out the young pharaoh may have had a rare bone disorder that made walking a bit difficult. Now, Ginger is probably one of the coolest mummies you'll ever hear about. He's like a 5,000-year-old time traveler who still rocks his golden hair and perfectly preserved nails. Ginger was found in Egypt and is believed to be the oldest naturally mummified body ever discovered. Before people even knew how to mummify bodies, they used to bury them in shallow graves in the hot, dry desert sand. The heat and dryness would suck the moisture out of the body, stopping bacteria from growing. Basically, nature's own preservation technique. Scientists aren't totally sure if Ginger's preservation was intentional or just a lucky accident. But since he was buried with some pottery, it's likely that whoever buried him knew something about preservation methods. If you ever want to meet Ginger, you can find him chilling in the British Museum. Here's another wild story. A Dutch art collector bought a statue from Asia, and inside it they discovered a hidden mummy. Unfortunately, the body was way too fragile to be removed, so they had to leave it inside the statue. What's even more amazing is that this mummy is over 1,000 years old, and it had been on display for 200 years before someone realized what was inside. When scientists did a CT scan, they found the mummy was filled with paper scrolls covered in writing. Experts think this person might have undergone something called self-mummification, an intense process involving a strict diet and special teas to stop bacteria from breaking down the body. Very few people could endure this ritual, and those who succeeded were deeply respected. Now let's talk about Queen Nefertiti, who has puzzled historians and archaeologists like no other Egyptian queen. Based on her statues, she was known for her slender neck, wide eyes, and high cheekbones. Her name literally means the beautiful woman has come. Talk about living up to your name. She wasn't a pharaoh herself, but Nefertiti still left a huge mark. Written records show she played a very influential role as queen and wife. She was admired for her power, but also made a fair share of enemies. She was connected to King Tut, not biologically, but as his stepmother. To this day, no one's been able to identify her mother, but that might be changing soon. A local Egyptologist digging in the Valley of the Kings found two mummies that could be Nefertiti and her daughter. Experts say we may finally be getting a solid answer about who these mummies really are. And if one turns out to be Nefertiti, we're in for something special. Using DNA testing and CT scans, scientists could give us the most detailed and accurate picture of the queen ever seen. It's crazy to think we've only scratched the surface of what's buried beneath modern-day Egypt. Nefertiti ruled during a time of great strength and prosperity, but sadly died during a period of social unrest, and her tomb was lost. So, where's Mom? When you hear the word mummy, it might send chills down your spine. That's because most of us think of spooky horror movie characters. But in reality, mummies have helped us understand a lot about ancient civilizations, their rulers, and how people dealt with death. The most famous mummy makers in history were the ancient Egyptians. They believed that some form of life after death was possible, if certain conditions were met. That's why they insisted on preserving bodies through mummification and placing them in tombs that were fully furnished, basically like giving them a private apartment for eternity. So why did they believe in all this? Well, it mostly came from their deep connection to nature. They saw how the sun rose and set, how the moon followed, and how new life always grew from dying plants. They also believed in a powerful spiritual figure, Osiris, who symbolized the cycle of death and rebirth. To prepare for the afterlife, the Egyptians followed special rituals like mummification, using things like honey, resins, and incense to preserve the body. And when it comes to mummies, no one is more famous than King Tutankhamun. He was a young pharaoh who ruled over 3,000 years ago. The problem with royal tombs is that most of them were looted long ago. People knew that ancient rulers were buried with treasure, so those tombs became major targets for thieves. But when King Tut's tomb was opened in 1922, everyone was thrilled, because unlike most, it hadn't been looted. It was that well hidden. Inside the tomb, his mummy was wrapped in 3 coffins, including one made of solid gold. The items found in his tomb gave us a glimpse into what life was like in ancient Egypt. Studying his mummy also helped us learn more about the culture and customs of that time. DNA tests even gave us insights into his family background. scientists discovered he had malaria and a foot deformity, which probably made it hard for him to walk. Ramses II was another powerful Egyptian pharaoh who ruled for 68 years, a really long time back then. He was famous for his military campaigns and building projects. A lot of things from his time are still around today, including a giant statue of him. Ramses II was about 6 feet tall and lived to be around 90 years old. After examining his mummy, scientists think he may have had a spinal condition that affected his back. Remember those tomb robbers we talked about earlier? They might be the reason Ramses II ended up in an ordinary coffin in a hidden cache of royal mummies at Deir el-Bahari, which was rediscovered in 1881. Thankfully, archaeologists were able to identify him because his journeys were recorded on the wrappings of his body. Mummification was a long and difficult process in ancient Egypt. It could take up to 70 days. A special person would recite sacred words while carefully handling the body, drying it out with a type of salt called natron. They also used linen and resin to make the body look lifelike and then wrapped it up in cloth. And when it comes to mummies, no one is more famous than King Tutankhamun. He was a young pharaoh who ruled over 3,000 years ago. The problem with royal tombs is that most of them were looted long ago. People knew that ancient rulers were buried with treasure, so those tombs became major targets for thieves. But when King Tut's tomb was opened in 1922, everyone was thrilled because, unlike most, it hadn't been looted. It was that well hidden. Inside the tomb, his mummy was wrapped in 3 coffins, including one made of solid gold. The items found in his tomb gave us a glimpse into what life was like in ancient Egypt. Studying his mummy also helped us learn more about the culture and customs of that time. DNA tests even gave us insights into his family background. Scientists discovered he had malaria and a foot deformity, which probably made it hard for him to walk. Ramses II was another powerful Egyptian pharaoh who ruled for 68 years, a really long time back then. He was famous for his military campaigns and building projects. A lot of things from his time are still around today, including a giant statue of him. Ramses II was about 6 feet tall and lived to be around 90 years old. After examining his mummy, scientists think he may have had a spinal condition that affected his back. Remember those tomb robbers we talked about earlier? They might be the reason Ramses II ended up in an ordinary coffin in a hidden cache of royal mummies at Deir el-Bahari, which was rediscovered in 1881. Thankfully, archaeologists were able to identify him because his journeys were recorded on the wrappings of his body. Mummification was a long and difficult process in ancient Egypt. It could take up to 70 days. A special person would recite sacred words while carefully handling the body, drying it out with a type of salt called natron. They also used linen and resin to make the body look lifelike and then wrapped it up in cloth. The tomb itself was just as important to the Egyptians. Take King Tut's tomb, for example. Its walls were covered in detailed artwork showing his journey to the afterlife, from the funeral procession to traveling through the underworld. Ancient Egyptians believed that everyone went on this spiritual journey after death, so they filled their tombs with objects and paintings to help along the way. The tomb walls were also decorated with spells from a special book filled with poems that they believed helped guide people to the afterlife. And to show how seriously they took this journey, people even left food in the tombs. In Tutankhamun's tomb, archaeologists found 36 jars of aged wine and baskets of fruit, likely left to help him during his trip to the next world. Since they believed the journey to the afterlife took a long time, they included plenty of supplies like food and water for their loved ones. Pharaohs often packed their tombs with fancy clothes and beautiful jewelry to make sure they traveled in style. These included all kinds of linen garments like robes, scarves, gloves, and headpieces, along with lots of gold jewelry inlaid with gemstones, bracelets, buckles, pendants, necklaces, rings, and even small protective beetle charms. Some tombs even had fans made from ivory and ostrich feathers to keep the pharaohs cool in the afterlife. Some ancient rulers also included boats in their tombs. For instance, Pharaoh Khufu, who built the Great Pyramid of Giza, was buried with a huge boat inside. King Tut, on the other hand, didn't have a real boat in his tomb, but he was buried with many boat oars as well as 3 chariots and several walking sticks made of precious materials. Maybe that means he preferred to travel by land rather than by sea in the afterlife. One of the most interesting things found near ancient mummies was bottles of oils and perfumes. If the pharaohs were going to look classy, they might as well smell good too, right? Some were also buried with ancient board games, many made from expensive materials like gold or ivory. One of these games was called Senet. It was really popular in ancient Egypt and is kind of like an early version of chess. Now, even though ancient Egyptians are famous for their mummies, they weren't the first to come up with the idea. Actually, it all started in South America with an ancient civilization called the Chinchorro. As far as we know, they were the first people to mummify their dead, starting around 2,000 years before the Egyptians began their own rituals. Sure, we can learn a ton about ancient rulers from their mummies, but until recently we had no idea what they really looked like when they were alive. But not long ago, archaeologists studying ancient Egyptian artifacts came across some incredible mummy portraits. These were highly detailed paintings of individuals that were made while they were still alive. They were usually painted on wood panels, not canvas like the classic paintings we're used to. These portraits are famous for being realistic and beautiful, giving us an amazing glimpse into what these ancient people really looked like. Researchers have used these portraits to help diagnose diseases by comparing them to the mummies they were painted for. Some of the paintings even include jewelry that was later found on the actual mummies. The recent discovery of some of these mummy portraits in Central Egypt is a big deal. It's the first time in over 100 years that paintings like these have been found. Mummification also happens naturally in some parts of the world. It can occur without human involvement when conditions are just right, like extreme cold or heat, low oxygen environments, or even accidental exposure to chemicals that preserve the body. In these situations, bacteria can't survive, so the body stays in relatively good shape. One of the most famous naturally preserved mummies is Otzi the Iceman. We now know he was a man who lived about 5,000 years ago in Europe. But when he was first discovered in the Alps in 1991, Austrian authorities actually thought he was a modern-day mountain climber because his body was so well preserved. However, once scientists removed him from the glacier, they realized he was from the Copper Age. A pretty creepy discovery was made in Egypt a few years ago. Want to hear about it? 16 human hands were found carefully buried in 4 strange pits. At first, they didn't even look human because they were abnormally large, but they turned out to be real human hands. What's really weird is that they were all right hands, no left hands at all. Turns out this might be linked to an ancient ritual. In Egyptian art and legends, there are stories of warriors cutting off the right hands of their enemies as a sign of victory and then trading them for gold. Since Egyptians believed in the afterlife, cutting off someone's hand meant cutting off their power forever. For the victors, this kind of defeat was a big deal. This particular conflict involved the Egyptians fighting the Hyksos, who lived in what used to be called Canaan. Egypt has always been a hotspot for amazing historical finds. Not long ago, a giant papyrus scroll was discovered. If you unrolled it, it would be a little taller than the smallest skyscraper in the world, which is in Wichita Falls, Texas. Before people had apps to take notes, they wrote on this stuff made from the papyrus plant. Around 2,000 years ago, ancient Egyptians wrote something kind of like a book on this scroll. It described their traditions and beliefs about the afterlife. It's considered one of the most important texts from ancient Egypt and is still sold in bookstores today. This ancient manuscript was found in a room south of the Pyramid of Djoser in Saqqara. And just so you know, Djoser's pyramid is actually the oldest one in Egypt, not the ones at Giza like many people think. Recently, Saqqara was buzzing with archaeologists who may have uncovered one of the oldest fully intact mummies ever found in Egypt. They believe this incredibly well-preserved mummy belonged to a wealthy man. He was found in a deep shaft wrapped in layers of gold leaf. There were lots of symbols that showed his status, like a headband, a chest bracelet, and the fact that he was wearing a robe reserved for elite Egyptians. The most exciting part: his burial chamber was still sealed with mortar, just as it had been 4,300 years ago. Now here's something strange. Back in 2008, archaeologists discovered a missing pyramid. It had been lost because it collapsed over time around 4,000 years ago. Today, all that's left is its base, but it was once a very important place. Back in the day, the area around the pyramid hosted rituals where high priests carried mummified remains of sacred bulls. Here's a fun fact. Ancient Egyptians believed that Apis bulls were the earthly form of the god of Memphis and were connected to fertility rituals. But not just any bull could be chosen. It had to be completely black with a single white mark between its horns and had to meet other very specific traits. Once chosen, these bulls were honored during their lives, and when they died, they were mummified and buried in underground tombs. That lost pyramid vanished from view sometime around the 19th century, but a German archaeologist was the first to discover it in the village of Saqqara. He called it the Headless Pyramid when he found it. But years later, the desert sands covered it up completely. There were a few digs during the 1800s and early 1900s, but they weren't very organized. That's why scientists were so excited when they recently uncovered the entire base of the pyramid after removing 25 feet of sand that had buried it. Oh, and by the way, American archaeologists are now digging in Egypt and think they found a cemetery that could hold over 1 million mummified bodies. So far, archaeologists have dug down about 1,700 millimeters. One big difference between these mummies and the classic Egyptian pharaoh mummies is that these people weren't kings or rulers. They were regular folks who probably lived around 1,500 years ago, back when Egypt was under the control of the Roman and Byzantine empires. But the name of their burial site is awesome. The Water Buffalo Road, just in case you want to check it out on your next trip. Besides bulls and buffalo, the ancient Egyptians also loved baboon monkeys. See a pattern here? Back in the early 1900s, archaeologists found a site full of mummified baboons in a place called, guess what? The Valley of the Monkeys. Animals didn't get mummified unless they were important. Some animals were more important than others because they were linked to specific gods. For example, the jackal was connected to Anubis, the god of the afterlife, and cats were linked to the goddess Bastet. Baboons were super important because they were believed to be connected to Thoth, the god of wisdom and advisor to Ra, one of Egypt's greatest gods. The archaeologists who studied these baboons weren't too happy, though. They think these baboons were kept indoors and didn't get much sunlight their whole lives. They had a serious vitamin D deficiency and were poorly fed. Maybe Thoth was mad at the baboon keepers? Just a guess. And because archaeologists in Egypt never have a dull day, they also found human mummies with golden tongues. Since the Egyptians cared a lot about the afterlife, they believed these golden tongues would help people speak in the afterlife. I mean, it's a long shot, but hey, why not? Some of these mummies were placed in wooden coffins along with goodies like necklaces, pottery, golden lotus flowers, scarabs. And no, not iPhones, I'm joking. Recently, a new temple was discovered in Egypt. Scientists think it was dedicated to Zeus Cassios, a mix between Zeus, the great Greek sky god, and Mount Cassios. While digging around the Sinai Peninsula, archaeologists found 2 pink granite columns sticking out of the ground. Bingo! They think these were the front gates of the temple, which collapsed in an earthquake many years ago. Speaking of gods, there weren't just serious ones. Scientists also recently found a gold ring in a city south of Cairo. No, Frodo, it's not magical. It was just a regular gold ring, but it had the image of the goddess of fun, officially named Bees. This god is often described in sacred texts as a happy, chubby dwarf. Today, lots of tattoos we get don't mean much. They're mostly for looks. But in ancient Egypt, women got tattoos as a symbol of protection during childbirth. At least, that's what scientists think. Near the Nile, archaeologists found some well-preserved mummies with tattoos, which is rare since skin usually breaks down. 2 of these women had tattoos on their lower backs. The designs were simple, mostly images, including that same chubby dwarf god, Bees, who also acted as a protector for women during childbirth. Now, would you believe me if I told you the ancient Egyptians invented robots? No? Yeah, me neither. But they were astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers, and somehow they also managed to create a strange invention, a wooden statue that some scientists call Hathor, a kind of robot god. This wooden statue was on display at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for years before someone noticed its secret. Using X-rays, experts found a mechanical system inside it. A pulley-like axle runs from the statue's shoulder to its left leg. When it's turned, the statue raises and lowers its hand. Come on, pick me, pick me. I raised my hand here. There are countless doors all over the world that haven't been opened for decades, even centuries. The question is, why? These days, it seems like you can open any door you want. But the truth is, some doors have been locked for a very serious reason. And until now, no one has discovered what treasures or secrets lie behind them. Here are 4 doors that keep their secrets well. The Taj Mahal. Subscribe with us to discover more forgotten history. Like, comment, and support our journey to uncover the truth behind ancient secrets. See you